Archaeological discovery to share with you right from the shadows of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It's a discovery that might just be writing our understanding of Jewish history in Zion.
For 3,000 years, blood, belief, and power have collided on a single stretch of land, Jerusalem's Temple Mount, fought over by empires and sanctified by faiths, while beneath its ancient stones, something waited in silence. In late 2023, scientists quietly aimed their instruments below the most contested ground on Earth, and then came the silence. No press releases, no statements. Why would a discovery demand secrecy instead of celebration? This wasn't a routine excavation or a forgotten ruin. It was a finding that challenges accepted history itself. So what could possibly be buried beneath this sacred ground that made experts hesitate to speak? And could it change how we understand the ancient world and our place within it? The sacred ground. Jerusalem rises from the hills like a crown of ancient stone. Its walls have witnessed more bloodshed, more devotion, and more human drama than perhaps any other city on earth. But there is one place within this city that stands apart from everything else. Not because it is the highest point, though it commands the landscape. Not because it is the oldest, though its foundations stretch back beyond recorded memory. It stands apart because three of the world's great religions believe that here, on this exact spot, heaven touches earth, the Temple Mount. In Hebrew, it is called Har Habayit, the mountain of the house. In Arabic, Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary.
Jews revere it as the site of two biblical temples. It's known as both Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, and Temple Mount.
35 acres of limestone platform that has been fought over, preyed upon, and died for since before the concept of nations existed. To stand here is to stand at the intersection of faith and fury, where every stone carries the weight of contested meaning. For Jews, this is the holiest site in existence. Nearly 3,000 years ago, King Solomon built the first temple on this ground, a structure so magnificent that ancient accounts describe it in almost supernatural terms. Within its innermost chamber, the Holy of Holies, sat the Ark of the Covenant, guarded by golden cherubim, containing what believers held to be the very presence of God.
The Ark of the Covenant looks like. God himself is, in fact, the architect of this, and so is very precise about the measurements and the way that it has to be built.
When the Babylonians destroyed that temple in 586 BCE, they scattered the Jewish people across the known world. But the longing for this place never died. It was written into prayers, woven into wedding ceremonies, embedded in the collective memory of a people who promised themselves they would return. And in return, they did. The Second Temple rose from the rubble, standing for over 500 years until Roman legions tore it down in 70 CE.
Coming up, the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD sent shockwaves throughout the Jewish world.
The Western Wall, that iconic stretch of massive blocks where the faithful still gather to pray, is the last surviving remnant of that Second Temple complex. For 2 millennia, Jews have wept at these stones, pressing written prayers into the cracks, mourning what was lost and dreaming of what might one day be rebuilt.
Key element of biblical prophecy involving the return of Jesus Christ to the earth, building a third temple in Jerusalem. Now there's a movement in Israel to make it happen.
For Muslims, this same ground carries equally profound significance. It was from this rock, now covered by the golden dome of the rock, that the Prophet Muhammad is believed to have ascended to heaven during his miraculous night journey.
Remember, Muhammad, according to tradition, reached to an Aqsa, went to the foundation stone, which is today the Dome of the Rock, and ascended into heaven, not before he met all the prophets.
The Al-Aqsa Mosque, standing at the southern end of the platform, is the third holiest site in Islam. For a time, it was even the original direction of prayer for the early Muslim faithful. When the dome was completed in the 7th century, its gleaming tiles and golden crown became one of the most recognizable religious structures on the planet. Christians, too, hold this place sacred by proximity and history. Jesus walked these courts. He overturned the tables of money changers in the Temple Plaza, declaring that this house of prayer had become a den of thieves. The shadow of the temple fell across his ministry, his teachings, and ultimately his death and the events that followed. So here we have a piece of land, smaller than most city parks, that 3 religions, representing billions of believers, consider among the most sacred places on earth. The administrative arrangement that governs it today is so delicate, so fraught with tension, that even minor disruptions have sparked international incidents. Jordan maintains religious control through an organization called the Waqf. Israel controls physical security, and everyone walks on eggshells, knowing that the wrong move could ignite violence that spreads far beyond these ancient walls.
The border line between the tragedy that will happen if it's not, if it will be after tomorrow an electronic gate. But I hope the Israeli government will be so wise to avoid the violence.
And beneath all of this, beneath the prayers and politics, beneath the guards and the pilgrims, beneath centuries of construction and destruction, there are secrets that have never been properly investigated. Until now. The Forbidden Dig. Here is the cruel irony of the Temple Mount. Despite being one of the most historically significant sites on the planet, it is also one of the least explored. At most ancient sites, archaeologists can dig. They can carefully remove layer after layer of earth, reading the story of human habitation like chapters in a book. But at the Temple Mount, digging is essentially forbidden. The reasons are as spiritual as they are political. In Jewish law, there is a genuine fear that excavation might disturb the location of the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctum where God's presence was said to dwell. Since no one knows exactly where that chamber stood, many observant Jews avoid even walking on the Temple Mount platform, lest they accidentally step on ground too sacred for human feet. The idea of driving shovels into that earth is simply unthinkable. For Muslims, the situation is equally charged. The Waqf has historically resisted any archaeological investigation on the Mount, viewing such efforts with deep suspicion. There are fears, not entirely unfounded, that findings could be weaponized politically, used to undermine Islamic claims to the site or to justify changes in the current status quo. In this atmosphere of distrust, even the suggestion of excavation can trigger diplomatic crises. As one archaeologist put it, digging here isn't about history, it's about war and peace. This is why when the first tantalizing clues emerged, they came not from careful excavation, but from an act of destruction. In the late 1990s, during unauthorized construction work on the Temple Mount, workers dug out hundreds of truckloads of ancient soil and dumped it in the Kidron Valley like garbage.
In 1999, while I was a student of archaeology, I heard about an illegal excavation that took place in the Temple Mount. A huge pit had been illegally bulldozed deep into the Temple Mount.
Centuries of potential historical evidence scattered across a refuse pile without documentation, without supervision, without a single archaeologist present to observe what was being removed. It was an archaeological catastrophe. And it was also an unexpected gift. In 2004, a group of Israeli archaeologists launched one of the most unusual excavations in modern history. They called it the Temple Mount Sifting Project.
The Temple Mount Sifting Project is an archaeological adventure whose purpose is to find the empirical proof of what was atop the Temple Mount thousands of years ago.
Working out of a public park in East Jerusalem, they began the painstaking process of sorting through every bucket of that discarded debris. Volunteers armed with screens and brushes picked through the soil piece by piece, year after year, never knowing what might emerge next. What emerged was staggering. Over 500,000 artifacts have been recovered so far. Coins from the time of Herod, Crusader-era arrowheads, Islamic jewelry and Byzantine crosses, Roman weapons and Ottoman pipes. The debris contained 3,000 years of human activity compressed into random layers, a jumbled timeline of everyone who had ever walked, worshipped, fought, or died on that sacred ground. But it was the oldest material that drew the most attention: fragments from the First Temple period, the era of Solomon, the time that many scholars had dismissed as more legend than history. Voices from the ancient world. Picture: a volunteer hunched over a sifting screen in the relentless Jerusalem heat, methodically brushing away dirt from what appears to be nothing more than a pebble. It's an unremarkable scene, one repeated thousands of times over years of patient, almost monotonous work. Yet slowly, improbably, the debris began to speak. From the scattered earth emerged fragments that pointed unmistakably to ancient religious life. Pieces of oil lamps surfaced, their surfaces still darkened by centuries-old soot. These weren't ordinary household items. Their shape and construction matched lamps used in sacred spaces, designed to burn steadily through long rituals, illuminating temple corridors after nightfall. Nearby were charred animal bones, bearing cut marks consistent with ritual slaughter. These were not kitchen scraps, but remnants of sacrifice, the physical residue of offerings once made to the divine. Ceremonial vessels followed, shattered fragments whose forms suggested they once held oils, wine, or other substances prescribed in ancient rites. Each object added another note to a growing chorus of evidence. This ground had been a center of organized worship long before Roman legions marched through Jerusalem. For scholars who had long argued that the First Temple was exaggerated or symbolic, the margin for doubt was shrinking rapidly. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Among thousands of fragments, a small lump of hardened clay caught a researcher's attention. Flattened, cracked, and stained by millennia underground, it looked no different from countless other pieces that had already passed through the screens. It would have been easy, reasonable even, to dismiss it. But something about it prompted a closer look. Under magnification, faint impressions emerged. Lines, shapes, letters. It was a bulla, a seal impression. In the ancient world, important documents were rolled, tied with string, and sealed with a blob of wet clay. An official would press a personal seal into that clay, leaving behind a mark that served as both signature and security. Once the document was opened, the bulla usually broke and was discarded. Few survived. This one had endured for more than 26 centuries. The inscription was written in Paleo-Hebrew, the script used by Israelites before the Babylonian exile reshaped their language and writing. Slowly, letter by letter, a name emerged: Gedaliahu, son of Immer. To a casual observer, it might seem like a minor curiosity, an ancient name pressed into clay. But to scholars familiar with biblical texts, it was electrifying. In the book of Jeremiah, Immer is identified as a priestly family active during the First Temple period, not a symbolic lineage, not a later invention, a real family, described as serving in the temple itself. This tiny piece of clay had reached across millennia to confirm the existence of an individual tied directly to a priestly house named in Scripture, a real person from a real family, serving in a real temple that some modern critics had argued never existed in the way ancient texts described. The Bible mentioned the family of Immer. Now the earth itself was testifying on their behalf, and this seal was not alone. As the sifting continued, more bullae appeared. Some bore names and titles that aligned strikingly with biblical records, administrative roles and family lines that matched ancient descriptions with unsettling precision. Others carried symbols rather than text: 7-branched menorahs, stylized temple gates, depictions of priestly garments and sacred implements. The imagery was unmistakable. These were objects tied directly to temple worship. Scientific analysis confirmed what researchers suspected. The clay matched local geological sources. The seal styles fit known First Temple conventions. Dating methods converged on the same period. These artifacts were not modern forgeries, nor were they ambiguous fragments bent to fit belief. They were the broken remains of a functioning religious and administrative system that had once operated on the Temple Mount, exactly where and when ancient sources claimed it had. Among the most evocative discoveries was a small bronze incense shovel. Its bowl still carried blackened residue, traces of aromatic compounds burned long ago. Tools just like it are described in ancient ritual texts, used by priests to carry incense into sacred spaces where smoke would rise as an offering. The residue clinging to the metal was, in a sense, visible prayer, chemistry preserving devotion across millennia. Nearby were finely crafted pieces of jewelry, rings, pendants, decorative items worked with skill and care. Some may have belonged to temple officials, others perhaps to pilgrims who had traveled to Jerusalem for festivals and lost their valuables amid crowds, panic, or destruction. Their owners never returned. The earth safeguarded their stories for nearly 3,000 years. One especially remarkable find was a carved ivory comb, its delicate teeth still intact. Etched into its surface was what scholars now recognize as one of the earliest complete Canaanite sentences ever discovered.
Ancient Canaanites. The first sentence ever written on their language from 1700 BCE apparently appears on an ivory comb.
A mundane inscription about its everyday use that became, unexpectedly, a priceless linguistic artifact. Even the most ordinary objects from this sacred ground carried extraordinary significance. With each artifact, the wall of skepticism surrounding the First Temple narrative cracked further. What some had dismissed as myth or theological embellishment was revealing itself as lived reality, structured, organized, and materially grounded. The ancient writers had not been inventing a past. They had been recording it. Yet for all its importance, the sifting project had limits. The soil had been removed from its original context, stripped from its precise locations without documentation. Artifacts were separated from the structures they once belonged to, their spatial relationships forever lost. It was like trying to reconstruct a library from scattered pages, shuffled and torn from their bindings. To truly understand what still lay beneath the Temple Mount, researchers would need a different approach. Not excavation, but observation. Not digging, but seeing. Technology capable of reading what stone concealed. And when scientists finally turned those tools toward the forbidden ground itself, they would uncover something no one was prepared for. What the scanners revealed. Between 2021 and 2024, a new generation of researchers approached the Temple Mount puzzle with tools that previous generations could never have imagined. Since physical excavation remained forbidden, they turned to ground-penetrating radar, the same technology that had revealed hidden chambers in Egypt's pyramids and mapped buried cities across the ancient world. The team focused on the southern edge of the Temple Mount, near the Western Wall, where British, Ottoman, and earlier explorers had long reported strange underground voids. Victorian-era surveyors had sketched maps showing chambers, staircases, and hollow spaces. But for generations, these reports had remained unverified whispers in the archaeological literature. Then, in 2023, the scanners detected something extraordinary. Deep beneath the bedrock, the radar began registering irregularities. Strange shapes appeared on the screens. Straight edges where nature shouldn't form them. Geometric patterns suggesting human engineering rather than geological accident. When the team cross-referenced their radar data with those hand-drawn British maps from the early 1900s, the outlines matched. The same corridors, the same blocked staircases, the same suspicious voids that explorers had briefly glimpsed over a century ago. The implications were staggering. These weren't natural cavities. They were sealed subterranean chambers, buried under centuries of construction and collapse, waiting to reveal their secrets. Working carefully within the Western Wall tunnels, in areas where excavation was legally permitted, researchers began to investigate. As workers cleared debris from an old Herodian structure, they uncovered something that made them stop in their tracks. A partially buried staircase carved directly into the limestone, leading downward into darkness.
So he dug a channel that took the water safely from the Gihon spring to the southern end where the water accumulated. And that system was still in use in the time of Jesus.
Inside, time had stood still. The chamber's upper walls bore Byzantine-era carvings, faded crosses, niche alcoves for candles or offerings, faint inscriptions that dated the space to the 4th or 5th century, suggesting it had once served as an early Christian worship site. This alone would have been a significant discovery, adding another layer to the complex religious history of the Mount. But what lay beneath the floor was even more compelling. Digging just inches deeper, the team struck a second foundation, older, much, much older. The base stones were massive, finely cut ashlar blocks stacked with a precision that modern engineers would envy. The construction style matched techniques found at Solomon's Gate in Megiddo, a hallmark of ancient Israelite engineering from the First Temple period. This wasn't just a Byzantine chapel. It had been built on top of something far more ancient, something that had been forgotten for over 2,000 years. The hidden infrastructure. Stratigraphic analysis confirmed what the researchers suspected. This lower layer predated Herod's famous temple renovations by several centuries. Its placement beneath the mount, aligned with biblical descriptions of sacred zones, hinted at a very specific purpose. But the most chilling realization came when they found the second staircase. Half collapsed and filled with debris, it trailed deeper into the earth before vanishing into sealed rock. And the sealing hadn't happened by accident. It hadn't occurred through natural collapse or the passage of time. Someone long ago had deliberately blocked this passage. Stone had been fitted against stone with obvious intention. A door meant never to be opened again. What were they trying to protect? Or what were they trying to hide? The chamber's location, its architectural style, and its alignment with ancient texts all pointed toward one possibility that the researchers were not yet ready to confirm publicly. This may have once been part of the inner sanctuary complex, or a pathway leading toward it. A route that priests and officials had walked nearly 3 millennia ago, carrying out the sacred duties described in Scripture. But the discoveries didn't stop there. While surveying the ground beneath the southern edge of the Temple Mount, the scientists detected something that didn't fit any of their expectations. A series of interconnected voids that were clearly not burial sites or storage pits. They were curved, precisely cut, and lined with a strange waterproof plaster that had preserved them across millennia. As they mapped the system, the pattern became clear. This was a vast underground network of cisterns, channels, and aqueducts carved directly into the bedrock itself. A complete water management system hidden beneath one of the holiest sites on Earth. Carbon dating of mineral residue on the plaster layers delivered another shock. These structures weren't Herodian. They weren't Roman. They date to the First Temple period, roughly the 9th to 8th century BCE, the era of Solomon and his successors. But it wasn't the age that stunned the experts. It was sophisticated. The system showed signs of hydraulic planning far ahead of its time. It was designed to control water flow, balance pressure, and store enormous quantities of water in a region that receives almost no rainfall for most of the year. Some channels featured narrow feeding tunnels that allowed runoff to fill reservoirs while preventing stagnation. Others had overflow ducts that redirected excess water to secondary chambers, ensuring constant supply without flooding. The engineering was elegant, efficient, and would have required advanced mathematical understanding to design and construct. This wasn't just a utility system, it was sacred infrastructure, the machine of holiness. When researchers overlaid their maps of the cistern network with ancient textual descriptions, the pieces began falling into place. Several of the largest basins were aligned perfectly with locations mentioned in the Book of Chronicles, which describes water preparations made by King Hezekiah and earlier rulers to support temple rituals. The ancient writers had recorded the existence of these systems. Now, nearly 3,000 years later, the physical evidence confirmed they were real. One particularly large basin sat beneath a spot that, according to early Hebrew texts, once held the altar of sacrifice.
Israeli archaeologists have discovered writing on a charred 1,500-year-old piece of parchment using advanced digital imaging technology.
This basin was lined with thick layers of ash and bore faint traces of organic residue that showed signs of repeated use over centuries. It may have been part of the daily priestly routines described in Scripture: ritual hand-washing, the cleansing of sacrificial tools, the preparation of libation offerings. The water that flowed through these channels had served the same sacred purposes that the ancient texts described in detail. Scholars had long assumed that First Temple worship was largely symbolic, minimally organized, perhaps even primitive by later standards. But this water system told a completely different story. It revealed a level of complex spiritual logistics that could rival any modern infrastructure project. The builders hadn't just constructed a place of worship. They had engineered an entire system designed to support continuous sacred activity with mathematical precision. If they had planned the water system with this level of mastery, then they had almost certainly engineered everything else with equal care: the flow of worshipers, the cycles of purification, the timing of offerings, the movements of priests through sacred and common spaces. This wasn't primitive religion fumbling toward meaning. This was a machine of holiness, operated by people who understood exactly what they were doing and why. And here is the detail that has kept researchers talking late into the night. The aqueduct lines and runoff channels don't just end randomly. They lead, with apparent purpose, directly toward a specific area beneath the mount. The same area where those sealed chambers and blocked staircases were found. The same area that was deliberately hidden by human hands thousands of years ago. What waits beyond those sealed passages? What did the ancient builders consider so sacred, so dangerous, or so precious that they chose to close it off from all future generations? Those are questions that cannot yet be answered. The political and religious sensitivities surrounding the Temple Mount remain as intense as ever. Full excavation of these newly discovered areas may never be permitted, but the ground-penetrating radar continues to reveal more anomalies with each new survey. The pattern of evidence grows more compelling, and the scientific community watches, knowing that beneath this contested platform lies something of extraordinary historical significance. So what have we really uncovered here? Not just sealed chambers or ancient artifacts, but a quiet challenge to everything we thought we understood about the ancient world. Beneath one of the most watched, most fought over pieces of land on Earth, the past is no longer abstract. It's physical, measurable, and waiting. The Temple Mount has survived empires, faiths, wars, and centuries of scrutiny, yet it still holds its deepest secrets out of reach. The passages remain sealed, the ground remains forbidden, and the silence surrounding what may lie below only deepens the mystery. Because if 3,000 years of conquest, prayer, and investigation haven't exhausted this site, what else has history overlooked? What truths are still buried beneath layers of stone, belief, and politics? As technology advances and questions grow more urgent, one thing is clear: this story is far from finished. And when the next discovery finally forces its way into the light, it may not just reshape our understanding of the past, but challenge how we see the present. So the question remains: When the ground beneath the Temple Mount finally reveals everything it's been hiding, will the world be ready for what it learns?